So thanks for joining us and for our panelists for being here. Again, this is ironic timing. I swear this was not intentional to have put this the day after the election. But with conflicts, and I don't know about you guys, but watching Trump and Obama and Clinton all give speeches trying to offer some sort of reconciliation and unity message, it is aligned with us thinking about conflict resolution today, albeit in a smaller scale on campus at UNLV. So we'll hear from our panelists who come from different corners of the academic universe at UNLV to talk about conflicts that might arise among grad students, might arise in a graduate student-faculty dynamic, other kinds of conflicts as well. In terms of ordering, Dean Kate Korgan will kick things off out of the Graduate College, and she of course sees patterned sorts of issues arise concerning conflicts that she can comment on, as well as share some other related insights. Then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Correales, who's in the Boyd School of Law and is also the University Ombuds. So he also deals with a variety of conflict situations on campus. Legal issues as well, of course, can enter this equation. And then Phil Burns joins us out of the UNLV Office of Student Conduct, where he too addresses a variety of things. So we can consider both practical issues, in terms of the policies at play, as well as the deeper philosophical discussions about what do we do when these inevitable conflicts arise, how do we work through them as best we can. So thanks for joining us and our panelists, and I'll turn it over to Dean Korgan.
Thank you. Hi everybody, thanks for coming out today. So I was a little bit torn this morning about whether to go forward with what I had prepared or whether to do something different, but we're just going to plow forward. And so I titled my presentation today, Avoiding, Managing, and Resolving Conflict, right? So from grad school and beyond, right? And so I really want to start, just to give you a sense of what I'm about to do. I want to start by talking about how to avoid conflict. And by avoiding conflict, I don't mean like there is conflict and I'm part of it, but I'm going to repress it. This is not the avoidance I'm talking about. The kind of avoidance I'm talking about is simply trying to avoid ending up in situations where conflict arises, right? So what we can do maybe proactively to avoid conflict. And then conflict, we know, is inevitable, right? It's one of those things in life that no matter who you are or how you live your life and what choices you make, you're likely at some point or points to find yourself in the midst of some sort of conflict, right? And when you find yourself there, how do you manage that as a human, right? As a person first. And then in the context of where that conflict is happening. So that takes us to the third point, which is resolving the conflict, right? And resolution really, I would argue, moves beyond dealing with the human part of the conflict and then takes you into the institutional setting in which the conflict is occurring. And for us here, it's generally the university setting, right? So we'll talk briefly about those things. So let's do that. I thought I'd start by giving you a bit of a typology of the kind of academic and professional disputes that I see. So unfortunately, we have almost 5,000 graduate and professional students, and unfortunately I don't know as many of them as I'd like, and I tend to meet students who have challenges and problems more often than I meet students who don't. So conflict resolution is actually quite a big part of my job as a dean, and I think that's true for most deans. And so I don't want to give you all kinds of horror stories and tales, although there are plenty, and I can certainly answer questions if you have them, but they tend to fall into 5 categories, I think. In no particular order, right? Not most common to least common, but thematically, issues of collaboration. Higher ed really requires that we as students and faculty work closely together, much more so at the graduate level than the undergraduate level. And so we then have multiple roles that we play with one another, right? So you're a student in a faculty member's class. You're also working in their lab. You're also writing an article with them, right? So these are all related interactions and responsibilities, but at the same time you have different roles in each, right? And so collaboration is often a source of discomfort for people. And sometimes that discomfort, because of personalities or work styles or other things, sometimes that discomfort escalates into conflict. Collaboration, however, my favorite definition of collaboration, though, is harnessing and managing differences, right? Which I really kind of love. So collaboration isn't premised on a foundation of no differences, right? Or of no challenges, but quite the opposite. The beauty of collaboration is that you pull different people together, different personalities, different expertise, different perspectives, and out of that comes something bigger and better than the sum of the parts, right? So there's great potential, but it also sometimes creates some conflict. Second, academic disputes, right? Intellectual and scholarly disagreements. Those are commonplace, and in fact, those are the nature of the field, but sometimes those can get out of hand, right? And they can start to feel personal, and that's when conflict tends to arise. Equity and justice disputes. Appropriate conversation today, but equity and justice disputes are really those about I am not being treated fairly because of my gender, my race, my ethnicity, my sexuality, my religion, my whatever, my combination, my age, right? Or just I'm not, maybe none of those things, but I know that my experience is different than the person next to me in the laboratory or on the research team or in the classroom, right? And so perceptions of unfairness often lead to conflict. Disputes over respect and ego. So I've been wounded, right? There's a fair amount of those kinds of issues that arise where it feels really personal. And part of that is, I think, as graduate students, you put everything into what you do, blood, sweat, tears, you don't make a lot of money, often, you don't always eat everything you wish you could, you don't get a lot of downtime, right? And so sometimes, either on the student or the faculty side, someone feels disrespected, right? And that can escalate quickly in terms of conflict. And then quality and value disputes. Feeling like the reward you're getting is not worth the investment you're putting in, whether it's a class, whether it's a research project, whether it's who gets authorship on a paper. That comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, but it sort of all fits into a theme. So for me, these are the 5 in the graduate college that I see most commonly. Now, there's no real answer to how to deal with those, but I always like sort of referring to the Thomas Skillman conflict mode instrument, and you can sort of figure out where you naturally fall on this. So the horizontal axis is cooperativeness. So on the left, it's uncooperative, on the right, very cooperative. And then the vertical is assertiveness, from unassertive to assertive, moving upward, right? So in that left bottom corner are folks who are unassertive, right, sort of passive, and uncooperative. And that often leads to avoidance behavior. So there is a conflict, but you're choosing to avoid it. But avoiding it often makes it escalate, right? If you are uncooperative and assertive, that often ends up being competition, which isn't necessarily or innately unhealthy, but it can be, right? Again, none of these things are necessarily bad, but in the wrong context or the wrong situation, or too much or too little, it can be. Over on the right, accommodating and collaborating, you can see the opposite. High cooperation, and then low unassertive is accommodating, and very assertive is more collaborating. And in the middle is this notion of compromise. So it doesn't fit every scenario, but I think it's helpful to sort of think about at any given point, where are you on this, and where would you like to be, right? And maybe you're right where you think you should be, and that's fine, but maybe not, and it can help you think through how to get there. So I have 3 things I want to talk about quickly: mindset, skill set, and tool set, right? And I think all 3 are useful for conflict resolution. Mindset is really promoting harmony. And I would argue that we can all be proactive about being positive. And this is part of that avoiding conflict model with the right mindset. Not always possible, but I think we could agree often desirable. So in terms of the workplace, right, there are, this shows 5 different ways to stay positive in the workplace, whether that's a classroom environment, a research team, an office, whatever. Give people the benefit of the doubt, right? Simple. Second, practice generosity of spirit, okay? Don't wait for other people to step in, just notice that someone needs help and offer to help, right? Give people the benefit of the doubt if they're having a bad day. If you know someone's particularly upset about the election, maybe recognize that they might not be as cheerful today, but it's really not about you. So generosity of spirit and giving benefit of doubt really go well together. Speaking well of others, right? That old adage, if you can't say something nice, maybe just don't say anything at all. And doing that, finding the good things, tends to not only make you feel better, but other people feel better. Fourth, look at what works, right? There's always something good in every situation. You can find it. My son came to school with me today to work. He was a little upset about things, and so he wanted to spend some time. And on the way into work, he said, maybe we should make a list of all the good things, right? And so a really great way to manage stress and potential conflict is to pause for a moment and try and find those gems. They might not outweigh the conflict, but they might help put some perspective on it. And then show appreciation, gratitude, thankfulness goes a very long way. So now these seem trite, and maybe they are. But in terms of cultivating a mindset to help you avoid conflict, I think these are the simple, everyday kinds of things that can make a difference, right? And it makes me think of the, I think it's 1988 book, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Okay, and in some ways it's super silly, and if you know the title, you know what the whole book says. But they're really basic, and so I always think, think like a kid, but act like an adult, right? So share everything, play fair, don't hit people. Yeah, that's good, right? When conflict arises,
Please don't hit people.
When conflict arises, I had that quote on the previous slide from President Reagan, right? That you never ever turn to violence, right? The answer is always a peaceful resolution. So put things back where you found them. Like, don't make messes in the office. Like, I've had conflicts where people come in and it's really about they share office space or kitchen space and they don't clean up after each other. So it's the same principle. Don't take things that aren't yours, right? Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. Basic cleanliness goes a long way. So you get the idea. Warm cookies and milk are good for you. I mean, every once in a while find the comfort food. And it doesn't have to be food. It can be a comfort compliment. It can be comfort music, whatever it happens to be. Take time to do some good things. To take a nap every day. I love that. I don't know if you've read The Sleep Revolution by Arianna Huffington. And so most of us walk around sleep deprived. And that tends to make people more agitated. So if you're a little bit hungry, you didn't have your cookies and milk, and you're sleep deprived, and you're in a stressful situation, and you're a grad student, right? It's a perfect petri dish for conflict, right? For anxiety. So I won't go through them all, but you get the idea, basically. So that's what I would argue is like a good starting mindset. And then a skill set. So conflict still happens. And when it does happen, how do you manage it? Right? What tools do you need? And so this is what I would say is sort of the human piece. How do you deal with yourself, your own feelings, your own sense of identity, your own humanity, and how do you recognize that in the other person, right? And so managing conflict, I say the strategy starts with you. You don't manage other people first, you manage you first, right? And by managing you first, what I would say is you reflect on your feelings, you think about your attitude, and you acknowledge the assumptions you're making on your side of the conflict, right? Take a little time to do that. Jot it down, type it up, or meditate on it, wherever you go to find some time and space, do that. Name the problems and the feelings you're associating with them. Because I think oftentimes we don't, right? It's such a fluster of something goes wrong, you get upset, you don't take time to sort out, am I angry, am I afraid, am I intimidated, am I hurt? Like, what are these things? And what you answer there might lead you to a different and more productive answer, right? So take the time to sort of sort that out a little. And then step away and try and imagine what the other person is thinking, assuming, feeling, right? So they seem really upset to you. What does that mean? Break that down, right? Because it begins to help you sort of go from me to you to we, right, to start to build that space. And I would argue it requires 3 skills, probably a lot more than that, because a quick presentation. 3 skills: recognizing ego, active listening and being present in the moment, and finding a common ground. So the ego, right, you all know what ego is. People say ego and they think it's a bad thing. Ego is not a bad thing. We can't be human without an ego. And ego is what mediates between the id and the superego, right? You all know the id and the superego? A little Freud in every talk is a good thing. So the id, right, are unharnessed drives, whatever they may be. And the superego is the voice of society within us, like the rules, the laws, we've been socialized into them. And the ego is that which mediates between the two. So you need some id to be human and to be creative, right, and to feel emotion. And then you need that superego to understand rules and laws and policies and what you're supposed to do, norms and values, and that ego mediates them. And in grad school, part of what you're doing is developing a professional ego, right? And so conflict is part of actually like learning how to develop that professional ego. Without conflict, you're not going to build the healthiest ego you probably can. So a little of this is not a bad thing. So, but there are ways to deal, healthy ways to deal with ego, and not let ego be, it's all about me all the time, my feelings matter more than others, right? That's an ego out of balance, okay? I like the quote in the middle, you seek problems because you need their gifts. I have seen graduate students who thrive on problems because it's more dramatic, interesting, exciting, it's a pleasant diversion from having to do their other work, right? Some grad students have really clean houses. You know, the whole, like, I clean instead of working. Oh, I can't possibly sit down and work when my house is clean. So that's not me, but I've met those people. But the same can be true with problems. Don't let problems be your escape, right? There are better ways to escape. Active listening, really simple. You all have heard this before, but most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So before you've even finished a sentence, right, I'm thinking, oh, this is what he means, this is where he's going, I know what the answer is going to be, now I'm going to say this, right? And we're 2, 3, 6 sentences ahead to the point where you say, okay, I've got this conversation done, I'm going to put my mind over here now and think about where that dude got the t-shirt. He must be a grad student. What program? Oh, right, back to you. And so most of us listen sort of half-heartedly and anticipating, again, with our own ego, how is this about me and what should I be saying, right? But really, listening is an art that requires attention more than talent, spirit over ego, and others over self, right? And so active listening is one of those skills that if you don't think you have it yet, is worth cultivating, and it will help you resolve conflict. And then start where you're at, go where they are, wherever the they is, right? And respect the difference to find common ground. And so I love the dog and cat. Bark, meow, bark, meow, bark. They're never going to understand one another, right? How dare you come in here and bark at me, says the human to the dog. You can't expect a cat to bark, right? And you can't expect a dog to come in and speak English, right? So you have to accept people where they are. That's part of knowing where you are, knowing where they are, right? And recognizing that you can't change what's going on around you until you change what's going on within you. Your expectations, your assumptions, your way of interacting. So last but not least then, all of that, you still have conflicts sometimes that require something beyond you, right? You've done all you can, and so here we are at the tool set. And the tool set really is about resources. And this is where my friends come in. So, resources. Be a savvy consumer of information, advice, and counsel. You are not alone. Not in grad school, not anywhere probably in your lives. There's always a resource or a person or someone with more expertise or a mentor that you can turn to who can help you frame a situation and know where to go next to resolve things. If you're a graduate student, specifically I would go to your department handbook. You all have them because I required them a year ago, and I've seen them all. So they all exist, and they get updated once a year and only once a year. And so the reason that we did that was in part for this very purpose. I mean, they serve lots of positive ends, but one is that they're a resource for students that you can rely on, and you know that it stays the same until the new catalog comes out, and then there are updates. So look at your handbook and see if you can find answers there. Go to the graduate catalog, which is online. You can find all kinds of information and policies and processes there. Look at the student conduct code. You're going to hear more about that in a moment. Go to your peers. Go to more senior graduate students, right, who are great resources to you. Go to faculty, your mentor, your advisor, your graduate coordinator, the chair. Barring that, go to the dean of your college. Make an appointment in your dean's office. Barring that, or maybe even before you do that, it's up to you. We have resources in the graduate college. So we have someone, do you know Valerie Burke? Valerie Burke? Everybody knows Valerie Burke. Sunny Val.
If not, you should.
Yes. Val does everything, and one of the things Val does is she runs our Grad Rebel Success Center. That's her. She's our Executive Director of Graduate Student Services. But one of the things she offers is a kind of non-academic advising. So don't go and ask Val, what class should I take? Is this professor better than that professor? You know, how do I write this paper? Not the right questions, although she'll point you in the right direction if you have them. But you can go to Val with policy questions, with I'm having a struggle with another student and I don't really want to get anybody else in my department involved kinds of questions. What do I need to do if I can't continue in school next semester but I want to finish my degree? What options are in front of me? All of those other kinds of things, Val is your go-to resource, and she will hook you up with resources around campus, and we have a fair amount of resources in the grad college to deal with these kinds of issues. Worst case, she's going to explain the appeal process, and she's going to suggest you submit an academic appeal, and she'll walk you through that whole process, and you can do that. So the reason we have an appeal process is not to make it more difficult and more paperwork, right? But to take a conflict or a stressful situation and to bureaucratize it, right? It's really just something you can spell out on paper, tell us what the issue is, right? Give us your documentation, and tell us what the remedies are that you're requesting. So this terrible thing happened, what would you like us to do for you, right? If you don't know that answer yet, you need to go back a couple slides and do some of that thinking, right? And ask what you need. And then you're going to get feedback, and maybe it's going to be positive and in your favor, and maybe it's not, but if it's not, we'll explain why. Maybe you'll get a full hearing. There's all kinds of options. But that's in place to protect students' rights to due process and to empower you, okay? And then, of course, we have campus offices that are tremendous resources. Title IX, Disability Resource Center, counseling and psychological services. There's lots and lots and lots of them depending on the nature of the conflict or the issues knotted up with it. The bottom line is you're not alone. keep documentation of conflict if it arises and continues, work through these stages, and seek insight, advice, help, and we'll guide you through the process because there are lots of processes here designed to help you. So with that, I will turn it over.
Oh, thank you. I guess we'll take questions after we're all done. Thanks for coming also on this very interesting day. I'm Rob Correales, and I'm the University Ombuds. I'm also a professor at the law school, and I've taught and written on many areas that are pertinent to you: employment discrimination, workers' compensation, academic freedom, academic responsibility, and I've also represented faculty in the entire system for the Nevada Faculty Alliance for about 12 years. So I know the system very well, I know the university very well, and I have seen all of the problems, different types of issues that Dr. Korgan has identified in many instances. My role is very simple, and that is to promote equity and to promote fairness in dispute resolution throughout campus. And I don't really take it to be that narrow. I really don't have any limitations to what I do if it is possible for me to intervene to promote a result that is beneficial to you and to your faculty colleagues. I have a full-time job at the law school to go to. I'm tenured, I'm a full professor, and I'm unafraid to become involved in any issue as a consequence. Nobody can hurt me, and I'm able to work very freely with you. I'm not beholden to anybody. I am absolutely neutral and independent of any office. And I take that role very seriously. I see myself as an equalizer because in many instances of disputes involving graduate students and faculty, there's a huge disparity in bargaining power, there's a huge disparity in leverage. And often that inhibits a person from seeking even a conversation about possibly resolving a conflict. So I want you to think of me as a person you can come to my office also that can call a dean, and the dean will open the door. I think it's very important to have a person in this office that has standing and leverage that can be used for your benefit. I have cards, if you would like to have a card. You never know when things can come up. I'm very easy to find. I'm like Villa Jack. All you have to do is call my name out now and I show up. No, I just look up on the website, the Ombuds office, and you can find me there. But as I think about my role here, with respect to graduate students, I think about us as a community. We have a little town here, right? It's a town of nearly 34,000 people, and we have all of the complexities and all of the malfunctions or dysfunctions of a little municipality. But we're not as formalized in the way we resolve issues as they are in a municipality. We have our own problems with procedure, etc. Our own problems with access. Not everybody sees things the same way. We have huge egos. We have claims to, I guess, superior status that we have to overcome in many cases, and that is sometimes even an obstacle for me. But think of this community as a community that you're joining for life. This is not a little town in the sense that it ends at the borders and then when you leave, you're gone. This is a community that's going to follow you wherever you go for the rest of your life. And it's a good community to be part of. You're here because you want to be intellectually attached to this community. It'll serve your purposes to have forged relationships that can work for you. Professional relationships, personal relationships, performance-based relationships, that all matters to you. So as you manage your time with us, I think you have to keep in mind this context. The context is I want to work toward my future. Any problem that I resolve now has to take into account the fact that I have to continue in this community. And so often as an attorney, I used to practice law, employment law. you encounter people that want to win and they want to punish the other side as they win, right? Not only go, I want to teach them a lesson. That's very difficult in the academy. In the academy, if you want to do that, there are consequences, and they're pretty real-world consequences to you, and you have to be very careful with those. So my office is there for you to avoid those potentially negative consequences. And what I preach most often is, as Dr. Korgan said, early action, early spotting, early recognition of potential problems, and also seeking intervention or help or assistance or counsel at a very early stage, because it is best for us to resolve problems at the lowest level of complexity. If you let them go for too long, because you feared confronting the individual because of their superior status, if you let them go too long because of negligence, because you just didn't want to deal with the thing, you will find that the problem will take on a life of its own and will become unmanageable at some point. And it may also become a legal issue. You can start with a matter that begins with a sideways glance in the hallway, and before you know it, you've got a hostile work environment if you let it go for too long. If you will seek my help or seek Dr. Korgan's help or Phil's help, we're going to be there for you. There are lots of people that are available to you, your dean, graduate coordinator, etc., other faculty, other colleagues. Ask their help early. But even before that, what I encourage you to do, what I want to encourage you to think about is to treat your life here, and I tell this to people pre-tenure often when I'm able to talk to them, to treat your life here as preparing for litigation. And by that I don't mean preparing for a fight, but protecting yourself along each step that you're taking by first, speaking early in the relationship between yourself and your superiors, whoever they may be, and making sure that there's a very clear understanding of rights and responsibilities in that relationship, and that those that understanding is reduced to a writing. It is very important for you to keep records as you begin and continue your career through the university. We often find problems where a student alleges that there was a promise that was made, and that promise was not fulfilled. And the promise may involve pay, it may involve credit, it may involve intellectual property. And I ask, so what is the writing? What happened? What is the agreement? And they tell me there is no agreement. And that becomes a big problem. I encourage you to keep records and to reduce things to writing, not for the purpose of preparing for a fight, but for your own protection. And that matters a lot. And as you go through the process of becoming a professional, becoming a graduate of our university, it'll serve you well to have had clarity in that relationship, both in terms of your rights and also in terms of your responsibilities to your program. Someone will come and say, I expect you to do this, and you'll have a record that can be the basis for a decision that would not have been possible in the absence of that record. So preparing early, speaking early, especially when the situation involves agreements about performance, about the responsibilities, about your rights, about deadlines, planning accordingly is very important. Always keeping in mind that a record in writing is far more important than a record, an informal record, even though you may have witnesses to it. So keep that in mind and think about that carefully. Also, as you move through the relationship with your advisor or whoever that may be, you have to keep in mind that you should communicate often and thoroughly about what is happening in that relationship. What is to happen next week is as important as what is to happen 2 years from now. So keep communicating as often and as constant as you need to make sure that you cut back or cut down on ambiguities in that relationship. You will do yourself a huge service by communicating constantly about expectations on you, about your rights, about your responsibilities, and avoiding ambiguity. When you spot problems, and you will, don't wait to address them. Address them as soon as you spot them. And you may be wrong about the problem, but it's better for you to get an answer on a problem that you were wrong about than to let it fester and then create a real problem. And for that, I'm available. You can come to my office and we're going to speak anonymously, confidentially, and I won't tell anybody. I will not move on anything unless you give me permission to do that. And like I said before, it's always easier to resolve problems at their early stages and make them go away, because your relationships are so important. Preserving those relationships and nurturing them are so important to your success, not just as you get through our program, as you graduate, but beyond that program. You will want to carry those relationships throughout your career. And if at all possible, try to avoid becoming formally involved in a mediation, but I can do that as well. A mediation becomes a problem, though, when only one party has been accused of wrongdoing, and often it's the student that's been accused of wrongdoing. A student comes in and says, I've been accused of wrongdoing, can you mediate this thing? And I have to tell them, well, it's very hard to do that, because you've been accused of wrongdoing. There's a different process for that. Mediation is effective when you have warring parties, both of which can be accused of wrongdoing, and it's not very effective when only one party has been accused of that. I can help you deal with matters that involve accusations of wrongdoing, but I cannot advocate for you. I cannot be your representative to the opposite party, but I can help you through the process. I can help you sometimes prepare records that can help you to present your side, but I cannot advocate for you. And I cannot advocate for you by proxy. Sometimes some person will come and say, can you help me with this? I'll teach them about the process and say, this is what will happen, what is likely to happen process-wise. They go away and say, well, Professor Correales said that this was going to happen, and it's his word, and he's a professor of law, and he dictated the result. And so, and I can't do that. I'm not an advocate for you, but I am a very committed neutral that can show you how to navigate through things. And I can always call Phil, call Dr. Park. We often work with each other.
We know each other.
And he doesn't want me to call him. But there are lots of resources, and you've seen them listed. You can take a card, call me anytime, and I love to hear from graduate students about their work and about how I may be able to help, and we're here for you.
Thank you.
I think I'll just say ditto and be done. Hi, I'm Phil Burns. I'm the director of the Office of Student Conduct. I know a couple of people came in late, but I have some handouts for you later, so feel free to take it. And actually, this one is really just my big business card. It's got a little description of our office and all our contact information up there. So a couple things that, and I'm probably just going to skip through some of the slides because some are much more valid than the others, but I think one of the things that I always like to start off with when I'm talking really to any group is that I know the Office of Student Conduct is usually that office that you hope you're not going to have to interact with. And while I get that on one side, because probably the thing we're best known for is students can get referred to us, undergrad or grad, one of the things that probably isn't as well known as I'd like it to be is that really we're the Office of Student Rights and Responsibilities and Conflict Resolution. If I could rename the office, if Dr. Fain would let me, that would probably be what it would switch to. And you know, it's actually for several reasons, and one is that we really do want to emphasize what student rights are. I think there's many times when students are aware of what their rights are, that can also help avoid a conflict. Sometimes students might find themselves in a situation and maybe even allow some things to happen to them because maybe they weren't aware of their rights. And as Robert said, you know, sometimes you can let a situation fester a little bit. And me and my southern upbringing, I like to say, you know, I'm ready to nip it in the bud as quick as possible too. So the sooner the better, the quicker the better. So one of our main responsibilities is to promote that students do know what their rights are. And some of those things are and I guess today might be a good day to talk about some of this too. But one of the things that we still see happen quite a bit is students not feeling comfortable disagreeing, particularly with a power figure, an anticipated power figure. And that's certainly a student right in terms of you have the right to inquiry and discussion and to certainly have your own opinion. You certainly have the right to be free from discrimination. Those are some things that I'm going to find on a slide up here. And unfortunately, one of the things that we have probably seen a huge uptick the last 18 months has been the amount of incivility and people treating each other poorly, sometimes just verbally, sometimes not. Probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but we in my profession, I'm very involved in my national profession, we have come to call it the Trump effect. People are seeing it so much, and if a national candidate can say mean things about other people, then why can't I? And I've actually had students in my office even say that. But we do want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that we certainly value and welcome and want every student to feel valued and welcomed regardless of any issue of diversity. And so that is one of the things that our office deals with a lot too, that should anyone ever feel like they are being treated differently or poorly, we want to know that. So I'm going to just skip through that a little bit here in terms of the orange handout I gave you does have some resources, and I know it says resources for faculty and staff. I really consider graduate students, most of you end up being a research assistant or graduate assistant or teaching assistant, so you're staff in my eyes. And so we do want to let you know some of the resources that we have here. And the Office of Student Conduct is typically known for, unfortunately, just maybe a situation has escalated, sometimes unnecessarily so, but escalated to the point of where somebody thinks, I'm going to file a complaint against somebody. Somebody has violated the student conduct code. It could be student to student, it often is. It's very oftentimes faculty filing a report on a student, either behaviorally or very commonly academic misconduct, even at the graduate college level. But that really is only a sliver of what we do. And while we certainly are committed to making sure that students do know what your rights are, not just even as a student, but should a conflict arise or should an issue arise and a student get referred to the Office of Student Conduct, even then our job is probably more so to make sure you know what your rights are and your options are. Because to get Southern again, one of the things I always like to tell students is I don't have a dog in the hunt. My job is not to be a prosecutor or to win a case. My job is to make sure that if somebody feels that they've been wronged or harmed or just something has happened that shouldn't have, my job is to help them to know what are your rights, what are your options, how do you file that report/complaint. But then my job is equally to make sure that whoever that report was filed on certainly is notified, informed, given the opportunity to respond, and treated as fairly as possible. One of the things that we try to tell all the students that come to our office, rarely can I promise what the outcome's going to be, but I should be able to promise that you have been heard and treated as fairly as possible. I never want a student leaving our office saying, well, gosh, that they didn't listen or they didn't treat me fairly. And so that is a small sliver of what we do. More toward today's topic too, though, is one of the things that our office, I would say, specializes in too, is that, and I actually have a large staff that I'll just let you look at that for a little bit while I talk. We actually have grown now to a much larger staff. 22 years ago, it was just me. But so I'm very excited to have a staff, and probably I'm a little less sleep deprived right now because of that. But we are all trained in conflict resolution. But student conduct professionals, we aren't policemen, we're not lawyers, we are educators. And so the approach by which we even do our jobs is what can be learned from this situation? How can, something good come out of this? So, if something happened that shouldn't have, well, what can we learn from it? And I know that Kate, in her presentation, I think really approached this several times, but as much as possible and whenever possible, unless there really is a safety, like an imminent safety issue at play, I like to see conflict as that opportunity for growth. Something happened that got these folks into conflict, but rarely would there not be the opportunity to have some growth and learning happen from that, and that really is how I see our job. So one of the things we want folks to know too is if you find yourself in that situation, it's always nice to know how to avoid the conflict. Not going to go there because Kate did a great job with that. But when folks find themselves in a situation of conflict, I would actually reiterate one thing Rob said too, is don't let it get larger, don't ignore it. And as a resource, one of the things that we like to offer is something called conflict coaching. It's actually on the page here, but there are a lot of times people, for lack of a better word, and I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but I'm old, I've been here 22 years, so I've got a little experience under my belt. And there's a lot of times we will have people come and really just want to sit down and talk and say, hey, this is happening. This might be with a fellow student, might be with a roommate, might be with an organization, fellow grad student in an office. Sometimes when you share small spaces, conflict can happen there. But they just want to talk through things, and sometimes just will serve as a sounding board and maybe offer some advice back. Have you thought of this? Have you tried this? Just to give you some tools to maybe go back, because a lot of people would like to try to solve a conflict themselves, if at all possible. So just that notion of conflict coaching is something that we offer. On rare occasions, we also do offer something called facilitated dialogue. That's a little tougher because it almost is being a go-between, and we really have to be careful about, like if you two are in a conflict, can I use your names?
Josh.
Erica.
Okay, so if Josh and Erica were in conflict, it could be that Josh comes and meets with me, he wants to talk about something, and I would go and talk to Erica and just say, hey, while you guys are kind of separated or something, I just want to share this, get some feedback from her. It's almost serving as a go-between. In some situations that's helpful, it's a service we do. I would say it's one of the least common ones we do, but it is a type of service we do. Another thing that I do, and Rob began to touch on it, but our office does offer mediation services too. And I think we all have ideas of what mediation is. In my office and in my world, there's a couple key things that I think has to happen at least for me to call it mediation, because there's other types of conflict resolution too. One is that I do think both parties have to voluntarily want to participate. It's just like almost counseling. You can't mediate somebody against their will. Then I call it something else. It might be arbitration or something else, but so I see it as when two individuals are really in a conflict and somehow they're not going to be able to resolve themselves, to have an unbiased third-party mediator, hopefully that really doesn't know either party either, because sometimes even the perception of power or imbalance can affect a good mediation. So just to serve as that unbalanced third-party mediator, I like to do it in teams too, and also, besides voluntary, I think something that's key to a mediation is that people recognize that there's some sort of relationship worth saving. Now, when I say relationship, that can take 1,000 different forms. It can be advisor-student, it can be roommate, it can be friends, it can be more. And the only requirement our office has is that one part of the equation has to be student. We do many student to student, but we have done student faculty and we have done student staff, depending on what the issue is. We've even done some student landlord. So it's depending on who it is. If we've got people that really want to sit down, talk, listen to each other, and really work out their own problems, we're happy to do that. And that's one of the things I love about mediation. It is time consuming, it's exhausting, but the parties are the ones that actually talk. Good mediators usually just help facilitate it, but we don't take a side, we don't offer the solution. The people talk, they identify their issues, they listen to each other, and they come up with their own resolutions. And we just help facilitate that. So that to me is one of the best conflict resolution methods that we can do. And of course it would be the most time consuming and tiring, right? It's usually the most effective. And there's another type of conflict resolution that's really become popular over the last several years, and it's something that I would say we try to incorporate even into our more formal processes, but it's a notion called restorative justice. Are folks fairly familiar with, anybody familiar with that term? I love the notion of restorative justice, especially as we apply it to a student's world or student conduct and the different things that can come up in that, because in a nutshell, restorative justice is really about many times when something happens, harm is done. Now, sometimes it can be obvious. Like it could be property destruction or physical injury. That's obvious harm. But there's a lot of other ways that harm could happen. Even in an academic misconduct case, a type of harm could happen. Certainly when two people interact in not the friendliest or nicest manner, emotional harm can happen. So there's a lot of different ways that you could actually identify that notion of harm. But what I love about restorative justice is it brings together really any of the parties involved in a conflict, and many times it's more than just two. There can be tertiary people that might also be affected by an incident. And it helps us, and we sit down and talk about how harm happened, maybe who feels they were harmed, and how can we hopefully repair that harm. And also get maybe whoever created the harm back to a place of not just accepting responsibility, but really wanting to be an active part and almost a voluntary part of, hey, how can I help repair the harm? How can I help fix this? Because a lot of times, in either a conduct world or just even in a conflict, resolving a conflict, sometimes somebody's pretty unhappy with how it's resolved. I might just say, you're wrong and you have to do this. And that might resolve it, but you probably don't feel as invested and maybe not real happy about it. The thing I love about restorative justice too, whenever we can do it in ours, is that, again, you're an active part of kind of deciding how it's going to get resolved. And a lot of times when it works best, you want to do that. So it's not, I'm telling you, you have to, I don't know, go go repair something you damaged. It's just like, gosh, let me. I want to. And so there's a real investment in repairing the harm. And what typically happens too is then that individual who sometimes under other methods really might not feel as invested or a part of the community, be it an office, a department, a res hall floor, whatever. This way also usually brings that individual back into the community. And so it's like, yep, I messed up, I made a mistake, but I want to take accountability for it. What can I do to make it right? And that's a really healing type of a process too. So, and yeah, for I guess people that are conflict nerds, I guess I might be one of those folks. A lot of this actually even grew up out of a lot of Native American culture, Celtic culture, a lot of different ancient cultures, like circles and things like that. But it's a really, really effective way of being able to involve all the necessary folks and resolve conflict. So that's another thing that we can try to do to help folks. I guess the only other thing because we probably should get to questions pretty soon. I'm the type of person I will talk for about 8 more hours if Peter lets me. I don't think that's what you signed up for. But also, I think one of the things that does help avoid a conflict, I'm going to get back more into my Office of Student Conducting world here, is really just knowing again what your responsibilities are. So another big part of our job is to make sure that you're aware of that you fall under the conduct code, whether you're on campus or off. A lot of people think it's just on campus. It's not. Our jurisdiction is really the world. And the way that we ask folks to think about it is just, if something happens that's arising out of your membership in the campus community, that's kind of the measuring stick we use. So, I've had student conduct cases in Italy. I was really upset they didn't fly me over to resolve it there, but we've had that. So of course it could be on campus. It's usually online now, to be honest. I've probably had more things happen online this last year or so than anywhere else. It's amazing the bravado people get when they're behind a computer screen, huh? And so we do have a lot of information that we try to share with folks around just, again, here's what as a student we expect from you. I'm certainly not going to go through all that. I know you've all memorized the conduct code. You know where to find it. It's on our website. But also, one of the handouts I had, and some of this can look really elementary. However, it still gets referred to our office on such a regular basis. I feel the need to remind folks, particularly around the student academic and academic integrity. I look at it either promoting academic integrity or preventing academic misconduct, however you want to look at it. And we really still do have a very significant number of graduate students that are referred for academic misconduct. It can be everything from research, creating data, certainly plagiarism, other ways that you can, not necessarily do your own work and give credit where credit's due. And I think the only thing, while it sounds tremendously simple, it still kind of holds true. And if you don't remember anything else I've said this last few minutes, 3 simple words, and that's just ask your instructor. There are many times, even at the graduate level, particularly I think if we're having students coming from it could be another country, it could just be another completely different type of an institution maybe, but if they're coming here and they're a new grad student, they truly may not have even the academic tool set to make sure that you're adequately giving credit where credit's due or doing your work the way that instructor wants you to do. And that really is different from class to class to class to class. And so one of the biggest ways that I know students can avoid that sort of conflict is just making sure that you're having that good open communication with your instructor. I think the last thing I would offer just around this too is that please know that should a situation ever arise around an academic conflict, especially if a student is being accused of some sort of misconduct, it's important to know that the university rule, or university policy around this, and a big part of it is to protect your rights, is that it has to be referred to the Office of Student Conduct. Anytime a faculty member would say, hey, I think you did X, whatever's in here, and there's any sort of an academic consequence, it has to be referred to our office. And that's so we can make sure you know what your options are. And if you want to disagree or appeal, we'll show you how to do that. Sometimes that's not the most comfortable thing to have that original, some faculty can be a little tougher than others, and so it can be intimidating. We make sure you know what your rights are, your options are. It also does protect the instructor by following university policy. We've had a few lawsuits, and those professors that follow university policy are typically in better stead. And then also it just serves as a good central clearinghouse. But again, it gives you your rights and options to know what those are. The very last thing I think I just want to touch on basically, and I do apologize because I'm going to like fly through stuff here, but anytime I get in front of a group of students, and it's a different type of a conflict, but I think it's a crucial thing to be aware of, is that UNLV has a program called the Student of Concern program, or Behavioral Intervention Team is what we are. And I would say many, many times, the students that do get reported to this are experiencing a huge conflict. And so one of the things we want you to know is that you are our best eyes and ears. You are our best frontline observers. You see each other and know each other's typical baseline behavior much more than us. We get to see you occasionally. You guys see each other all the time and know each other usually much, much better. And so we just want you to know that sometimes if either you, or particularly if you're aware of or see another student that you really think is going through a tough time, it could be a very temporary anxiety or stress. I have to be honest, like I already had a student of concern this morning over the election results last night. But it could be somebody that's experiencing tremendous anxiety, or maybe a mental or emotional health issue, up through more serious things. This has nothing to do with filing a complaint or conduct report. This is just, hey, I'm really concerned for somebody, I'm worried for them, and I want to get them connected to support resources. There's a website called, because if you look at Student of Concern on our main website, that'll get you that information. So we also want you to know that that's a service to really, again, help a student who typically is experiencing some sort of really tough internal conflict, maybe they're in conflict with other folks, but we can also help them get through a tough time. And I think that's a good place for me to stop. And now, Kate, why don't you come up here, so in case there's any question.
Yeah, so I want to thank all of our panelists first. Those are terrific presentations and very, very informative. And now we have plenty of time for discussion, I'm sure. So we just open the floor.
Yes, the lady in back.
As you were going through some of the slides that you skipped over,
I did, sorry.
That's okay, I keyed in on the word workshop at some point. So does the Office of Student Conduct offer any sort of workshops for individuals who interact with students regularly to help us de-escalate possible situations in the classroom?
Actually, we do, thank you. And we both could do a workshop with you, but that is certainly another area that our office handles a lot. It's classroom disruption or de-escalating disruptive behavior, and that's certainly another service that we offer as well.
Because I think it would be really helpful to be able to have that, what do you do in the moment? Clearly if something does erupt, it would be eventually referred.
Sure.
But in the moment, to make sure that everybody's safety is in check.
We actually do a workshop on just de-escalating disruptive behaviors. We also, the university right now actually has an online tool. It's called At Risk. I know. Okay, because that is one helpful tool to sometimes just give people some little helpful reminders of how to help de-escalate. But that is another workshop or service we do, and would be happy to do that. You've got my business card. Any other type of questions, comments?
While your brains are stewing, I'll throw one out. And one is procedural. So this comes up as grad coordinator. What is the set of steps that should be followed? And of course, this will vary by problem.
Yeah.
But let's say there are problems between two graduate students or between a graduate student and a faculty member. What are some of the, we've heard a little bit about this, but if you could maybe expand with some examples, perhaps, of the sequence of steps to go through. Should you initially confront the person yourself? Should you document first and say, I'm even emailing yourself or the person and saying, I've had a run-in and here's an issue I'd like to discuss. Can we meet? Do you go to the departmental chair? Do you go to your own chair of your committee? Do you go to one of your offices?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, but the steps, I mean, if you could kind of speak to this then.
Yeah.
If there is no sense of what to do, I recommend that they go to the Ombuds office immediately. Because I can provide guidance as to what is possible in terms of resolving the conflict or addressing the matter. I'm the most informal office of all on campus, but I think I'm also one of the safest places because there's no, as people come into my office, they're not filing a complaint and I'm not responding for anybody. So it's a place that you can come and discuss what has happened, the role of each participant in the conflict, and a place where we can get a fair assessment that can let you know whether sometimes you may have been at fault, or maybe you instigated, maybe the other person misunderstood something. A place where the matter can be solved or can be sorted out early so that we can de-escalate it. And if it's a matter that is more, I guess, more complex and more crucial than I can deal with, I know where to refer it. The Ombuds office would be a good first step, and a place where you can refer to the proper office if I can't solve it. But I think that the person should feel free and safe to approach anyone and along the line of those relationships. The graduate advisor, their professor. I would discourage the confrontation between the two parties when the conflict is fresh. Confronting somebody while they hate you is not a good idea. I think it's better to find a neutral that can help assess the situation.
Or at least wait 24 hours. Important rule.
But I mentioned it in passing, and Peter mentioned it in his question, document, right?
Yeah.
So keep a little, email yourself, right? Some notes, what happened, where it happened, when it happened, if anybody was around, because, you forget those details. And, it might be a small thing that just goes away until, 8 months later. And then 8 months later, you can't quite remember when that first one happened and who was around and what instigated it, right? But if it becomes a pattern, you're going to wish you had that info, right? So listen to your gut. Your gut's pretty good, I'm betting, And if your gut's saying something's off or this could be a problem, just, low investment of time, but potentially high payback.
Acting early is very important because if it's a matter of harassment and an event that may give rise to a complaint, there may be something that the compliance office can help with. There are statutory deadlines that create jurisdictional problems. If you are past those deadlines, then the office cannot address them.
Same as, sorry.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing that I would encourage you probably within, say, the next several months to be on the lookout for, I can even make sure we get some over here at this office, but there's several offices on campus. I really think it's being spearheaded by the Provost's office and Vice President of Student Affairs, probably a few other folks, is that we realize that there is such a cornucopia of types of complaints or conflicts that could happen. And when you first asked your question, Peter, I was going to give my typical lawyer answer, even though I'm not a lawyer, and say, it depends. Because there are so many types of things that could happen. And so we're trying to put together, hopefully as complete and handy-dandy as possible, piece of information. I know it'll be on a website, also a hard copy, but when this happens, who best to go to? And so, because it could be a department chair is appropriate, it could be one of us, it could be any number of folks. But a lot of times, we're real good too of telling faculty and staff, how to file a complaint on a student, but we're not always as good about telling students, if something's happening to you, where do you go, where do you file? And honestly, there are, I won't say countless, but numerous resources. And so we're trying to put together a good central clearinghouse to provide some guidance for that too. So I know that's happening this academic year.
And if it's an academic problem, so you're contesting equity in a class, right? The syllabus said one thing, the faculty member did a different thing, it negatively impacted your grade or your ability to learn or whatever. Just one example, there are lots of other academic issues, contesting something about your comp exam, whatever it happens to be. Then it is the graduate college that you're going to want to come to, because that appeal process I mentioned is specifically about academic appeals, right? And you should note that that academic appeal process is also a ticking clock, right? So you can't submit an appeal beyond 60 days from whatever it is that you're appealing, right? So we do every year get students who come back and say, you know, this happened 6 months ago, year and a half ago, and we still try to help and remedy, but technically, you know, it's too late for the appeals process. And so sooner is better. Document, figure out, you know, use the resources that we're talking about to figure out which pathway to follow, because, you know, I know we're giving you a very generic answer, but it really does depend on the nature of the issue, you know, who you talk to and what the next exact steps will be. But, you know, as I said, if it's a grad issue, academic, or even like something specific to grad students, that's the kind of thing Valerie tends to do, the non-academic, and then advise out as needed. But we might not have seen it all, but we've seen a lot. So we have some good resources.
We've got a couple years' experience on campus, so yeah. I used to say nothing surprises me, but I've learned to quit saying that. Because the very next day.
I'm curious what brought all of you here. You don't have to get personal about you're having a conflict with someone, but I guess let me rephrase that. I'm curious if you came out of a sort of generic interest or a more specific interest, or as instructors. So I know some of you are here because you're teachers and you're trying to handle, you know what the right situation is with your students. It seems like we have lots of teachers who are most interested in that.
Are most of you TAs or have the opportunity? Okay.
Very interesting. Okay.
I'll ask one other question. What if you observe a conflict between fellow students, between two graduate students? And once again, I know this will vary by context. If it's sexual harassment, that'll precipitate a different set of processes than something else. But
Yes.
in that case, that must be reported
Yes.
to the Title IX office. But thoughts on what you might do if you're in an awkward position, hearing two students in a hallway in some major conflict? And if anyone has maybe even witnessed, without going into too much detail, but
That's actually precisely why I asked the question about some sort of workshop in actual de-escalation. Because especially since undergrads will look at graduate students, TAs, as kind of like a junior faculty position for a lot of them, because they are in the classroom or doing the grading. Or vice versa, in my position where I'm teaching at the Academic Success Center while still finishing my degree, it's a situation where you feel somewhat responsible to try to de-escalate in the moment. Or whether it's in the classroom or something that you see outside in the hallway. I think that as we progress and mature as scholars and academics, we feel almost a responsibility to try to not let that situation get out of hand. Especially, you know, we have, I know the first year seminar program has actually, across the board, have been asked to provide some sort of emergency preparedness training, going over some of the, active shooter trainings and things like that. So with that in mind, like you were saying in your portion of the presentation, acknowledging seeing something early on and being able to de-escalate it before it becomes the problem is so key to being able to. And so I know if I saw two of my students arguing outside of the ASC or the Anthem department, one of the first things that I would feel compelled to do is say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
But then I step back with, do I have all of the necessary skill sets right now?
If I could offer two potential resources on that too, because again, that's actually a much more common dynamic than I'd like to think it is. But and there's two things that I think could be helpful. One is kind of going back again, we certainly can offer that sort of a resource. Also, there is something on the Student of Concern website that's an actually entire printed guide about how to address some different things. Yeah, so it's downloadable, but however you want, so there's that. And it's actually a resource that's been put together by a lot of folks. I wish I could take credit for it, but it's a lot of folks. But then also, And I think this is actually an incredible resource, and if you haven't availed yourself of it, the G9H Women's Center actually has a program called Green Dot. And while the probably primary thrust of it is violence prevention through, not being a bystander, but actually being an active, knowing how to approach, so many of those type of skills are very transferable to other types of conflict resolution, dispute situations, as far as just kind of knowing how to appropriately intervene or how to get somebody out of a tough situation in a safe, de-escalatory way. So that is another thing that if you see a Green Dot training, they do them regularly, that is, again, just some really good, it's a great skill set to develop.
So it does go beyond the Title IX, because I've done a lot of the Title IX stuff,
It
and
does.
survivors in school.
It
and
does.
that kind of
Green
thing.
Dot is particularly designed about, really how to, not be that bystander, but how to appropriately intervene and get involved, and either help remove somebody or, just help get a situation de-escalated. So I would highly recommend that.
I think she does have trainings coming up either this week or next week on that.
Really?
So, yeah.
Okay.
Great. I know Correales is very busy. She
Yeah,
does a lot of them.
She has, I just went to it last week, and I think she has some coming up. Yeah.
Great.
So the other thing that we haven't mentioned, and I hope you don't have to use it, but I want you to feel empowered, and that is call 911 or have public safety in your cell phone. Just have it programmed, have it at the top of the A's. I have it like A. So,
And be sure it's the 3669
366
number, not 3668, because that'll get you to the phone tree, and Lord knows what could happen by the time that phone tree is.
It takes a while, right?
3669 will get you right to the dispatch.
But, I always tell my staff too, because we get agitated students in the grad college, right? And they often find their way into whichever office is, closest or that has the door open. That Ms. Florence at the time works with us, and may be aware of this
The
phenomenon.
danger of having that open door policy.
Yeah, working at grad college. No, but I always say, don't doubt yourself. If you have a concern, just call, because they're not going to come in guns a-blazing. They're professionals. They'll assess the situation. They're not going to escalate it. Better to be safe than sorry, right?
They would
And
much
so-
rather that you called and have it be
That's right.
lower level than wish you would have. They're
Yeah.
very good about that.
And whether it's for you or if you see something else happening, you don't always have to jump in the middle, and that might not be safe to do, right? And maybe that's the best thing you can do is call and just get some experts to come help.
And then Phil brought up, you mentioned emails, or I think are online things.
Just the social media, just everything out in the internet world, yeah.
Any other quick tips on, let's say we get an email, a really nasty email from a student. Let's say you're teaching a class and an undergrad sends you an email that's really, really inappropriate, or you're on Facebook and you see something that's really, really stretches the boundaries. Any quick thoughts on things to?
Welcome to my world. Honestly, I'd probably get a couple of those a week. And again, I think it would probably be, where is he at that appropriate place to start? Sometimes a student will send an email that's just troubling, inappropriate. Usually good to start with your supervisor or department chair, just get the two heads better than one as far as, what's going on. I know I get quite a few student concern reports, because sometimes a student will send an email and it's in such a fashion that it's like, this student isn't just angry, there's some issues that maybe need to be addressed. When you get a 4-page email, all single-spaced, types of things, or 17 emails in a row sent between 2 a.m. and 3:15 a.m., stuff like that. Not like Donald Twitters at 3 a.m. Things like that. But
We're
honestly,
thinking of another case.
yeah. So a lot of times it could be a conduct thing if it's just pure harassment, threatening type of behavior. Sometimes you can tell, it's like, boy, I'm kind of concerned for this student's, even maybe it's temporary mental health, maybe mental health in general. So I would say you could start within the department, but many times it could work its way up to the grad college or Office of Student Conduct or Student Concern Program. And again, I would never hesitate to call, because we can always just talk about it. I get a lot of people that will just send me something going, what should I do with this? And sometimes, I would say, oftentimes, you may already be familiar with the student. Because a lot of times if they're acting out in one arena, they could be acting out somewhere else too. And that's helpful information for us to have. It's like, oh, they're on 3 radar screens now type thing.
I have a thought on the email question. So you get, an agitated email. All too often, people's first response is, this is not true, I'm gonna respond, sentence by sentence, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes their sentence, your sentence, their sentence,
Not a
sometimes
good de-escalatory technique.
this is not what to do. You can write it in your head, you can scribble it on paper or type it up for yourself. I urge you, don't do that, right? Don't hit send, and don't even spend the time to address every point, right? To prove that you're right and they're wrong, or that they, it's not required, right? If there is a core question in the rant, you might simply write back and answer the core question. And I would always recommend, in some very positive and nice way, also saying, this isn't, email communication is difficult, it's hard to read tone and intent, but it seems to me like this email isn't very professional, or there might be better ways to express yourself. My answer to your question is, or even better yet, come on in, let's talk, right? And if you're not comfortable meeting with the person alone, don't be alone when you meet with them. Meet them in a public place, down in the coffee shop, meet them in your office with somebody else around, your door open, a witness around. But it's amazing how just the human connection of a conversation, like looking people in the eyes and talking through something, you get a much more positive results than trying to continue the email back and forth. It doesn't always work, but it's always worth a try.
And something else that I would recommend, and it's actually in our de-escalation techniques, it's actually in that guide too, on the student concern thing, but many times if a student, especially like if they're angry at the instructor or angry at a situation, if you're a TA, if you can find some way to agree with something they're saying to, that can really be a huge de-escalator. Even if it is, boy, I can see you're really upset by this, or I can recognize your frustration. It doesn't mean that you agree that you are a terrible teacher or something, but you just to kind of, it can communicate that I'm listening to you and I want to kind of help you get this resolved. Any place where you can just send that sort of a, hey, I want to help you with this, can go a huge way toward also calming somebody down, because at least they're feeling like, okay, well, they heard me, they're listening to me.
And similarly, maybe not going right to the heart of the conflict or letting them talk over and over about the same problem. Sort of just make some other connection, right? Whatever it happens to be. Maybe as they're settling in to start the conversation with you, some piece of small talk. So, where are you from? So, what are the classes you taking this semester? Are you involved in any, clubs or activities around campus? What do you like to do when you're not at school? Anything that would just be small talk that you, again, make that human connection.
What is the layer of the golden bear?
It
It's his
helps.
t-shirt, by the way. For those of you back in the room, okay?
We know what it is. So just, because it's very tempting in those moments, I think, to clam up and be afraid to say anything. The other point that doesn't directly answer this question, but it's I think a good general tip: treat people the same no matter what. I think I'll probably hand this off across the table here in a second, but I think one of the worst possible things that can happen when there's a conflict is that one of the parties decide something's wrong with this person, or this person is unpredictable, or this person's dangerous, or this person's grumpy, or this person is whatever. I don't like this person, whatever. And so I'm going to treat them differently. And oftentimes, the different is meant to be helpful. Helpful difference is still different, right? So, well, usually we only let students take comps twice. But it'll be easier. We'll just let you take it the third time, right? We'll just let you retake that test, even though I didn't let anybody else retake the test, because you're really upset, so just go ahead and retake the test, right? When we start treating people differently or trying to assuage a situation by just sort of doing things that you would not do otherwise with other people, you get in trouble, right? And sometimes it's well-intentioned, other times it's not well-intentioned, and it might even be not fully conscious, right? You might not realize that you're treating this person differently, but it's very important. You dot your I's, you cross the T's, you follow the rules, you treat people fairly and equitably and consistently, and then I think you're in the best possible situation to come to a good resolution.
I would modify that a little bit in that people who actually look like they're similarly situated may not be similarly situated. And so, for example, you have a person who's taken comps twice, and suddenly they discover they have a learning disability. And they failed twice, and there's new information about why they may have failed. And so as you think about what is the purpose of what we do, The purpose of what we do is to be helpful, right? And to make sure that individuals are getting what they're entitled to. And the law says at times we have to make exceptions. And to the extent that there are different circumstances, then you may want to treat people who look similarly situated differently.
That's true.
Because there may be newly discovered evidence that commands you to do.
Yeah, if you're remedying a situation, right, and that's a really appropriate motivator, I think.
And if I could ask for, since most of you I think are Ts at some point, a really common thing that can also come up is if a student self-discloses to you that they have a disability and they may request an accommodation. Hopefully you've been trained really good on that you would never ever provide an accommodation unless the DRC says it's a reasonable one. Because that we've really seen some things, and actually we've had some, I'll use the word, we've seen some real harm done by people who thought they were being helpful and really were providing an unreasonable accommodation, which doesn't help that student then. You know, really doesn't help their success. So that is one of the things about you can always be caring and supportive, but you do want to make sure that you would never provide a documentation for a disability unless you've gotten that documentation from the DRC.
So, well, that's probably a good place to stop. I didn't tell you guys this, but we're all going to DC now, collectively, and we're going to resolve all the world's countries' conflicts.
Oh, I thought you meant the dining commons.
No.
Are you buying us lunch?
Washington DC. So I didn't tell you to pack your bags, but here we go, you guys. You're all prepared.
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And if
Thank
you ever
you.
need anything, you know where to find me
Yeah.
and all of us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.